Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. Thank you for holding this hearing, and I'm pleased to be your ally in regard to this legislation. And I appreciate the testimony of the two presidents of our farm organizations. I don't have any questions. I want to kind of outline the history and my understanding of what we're about here. In July of 2000, I offered an amendment on the House floor as a relatively new member of the House of Representatives that would prohibit the use of any money in an appropriation bill from being used to enforce sanctions for food, medicine, and agricultural products in a sale to Cuba. The end result of that amendment, and it was a controversial day. I remember it as part of my time in Congress. It will stand out to me. But ultimately, despite being suggested that this amendment would be overwhelmingly defeated, it passed by 301 to 116. A majority of Republicans, a majority of Democrats said it's time to change the policy. It changed the history of our relationship between the United States and Cuba, a history that had been in existence for 40 years in which there were no sales of any of those products to Cuba. And again, we're not even talking about trade. We're talking about sales. And so the end result of that amendment and the broad support here in that Congress, July of 2000, and in fact, all the members to my right voted for that amendment. It's so long ago that there's no one here who voted against that amendment. They just weren't here at the time. So it had broad support among the Agriculture Committee and a broad set of supporters among all members of the House. 301 to 116 says let's do something different. I remember my conversation on the House floor that said in Kansas we'll try something once. If it doesn't work, we probably will try it again. We might even try it a third time. But after about 40 years, Kansans would decide, let's try something different. If our goal is to change the leadership of Cuba, let's do something different than what we are doing because it's not working. And I will admit that my interest in this was very provincial. It was about Kansas farmers. It was how do we get another market in a very difficult economy in which we can sell our products to. And as a result, the Trade Sanctions and Reform Export Enhancement Act of 2000 became law. We were doing just fine until 2005 when the Treasury Department decided to change the regulations and say that cash in advance no longer meant, as it does every place else in our relationship, it no longer means when the ship arrives in Havana, it means when the ship leaves the United States. So we added another set of 4, 5, 6 days, 2 weeks, in which the Cubans had to pay that much earlier. We also said that you can't from the very beginning, you've never been able to finance this. There's no government subsidies in these sales. We restricted the ability to use a U.S. bank in those regulations, and so they then had to go to a third-party bank in a foreign country, get a letter of credit, and we increased the cost of doing business with the United States. As a result, after the 2005 change in regulations, we lost 20 to 30% of our exports. And so year after year, I've offered the amendment, again, to an appropriation bill that says no money can be spent in this appropriation bill to enforce those new regulations, which make no sense. And that amendment has passed the House time and time again. That's what's in this bill. It's been approved as most recently as last year in an appropriation bill. We've said it's okay, and sometimes when I've offered my amendment, it's been adopted by voice vote. And so the controversy that sometimes surrounds this issue, I think, is pretty limited when it comes to the agricultural side of what we're doing here. As a result of the change in our laws, and despite the fact that these restrictions made it more difficult and we were losing market, and we became seen by the Cubans as an unreliable selling partner, again, not a trading partner, a selling partner, we still sell $708 million worth of agricultural commodities to Cuba in 2008. And it's rice. They import rice from Vietnam and China if they're not buying it from us. This idea that whether or not how we behave ourselves, whether or not the food actually gets to the Cuban people, I don't understand that issue, because when we don't sell, all we're doing, this is a unilateral sanction, all we're doing is restricting our ability for our farmers, our agribusinesses to conduct business in Cuba, and yet France, Argentina, Canada, they love our embargo. They love the fact that we've made this market more restrictive because they fill in. And so if you're interested in whether or not the Cuban people are getting the food, that's not this bill. We can't necessarily affect that because when we don't sell, somebody else does. Those decisions are already made by someplace down the road, not whether or not we agree to take cash. All the agricultural side of this legislation does is return us to the common days, the days before 2005, in which we operate normally. And it's normally compared around the world. And we deal with communist countries on an ongoing basis in a trading relationship in which we offer them credit. Who is the United States' biggest creditor? China. And yet we are nervous about selling for cash up front agriculture, commodities, food, and medicine to a country 90 miles off our shore. What a double standard we have created in this country. In Kansas, and I hope to ask my Kansas witness today, we would not object to selling Boeing aircraft to China. And yet we worry about whether or not we're going to sell wheat to Cuba. I don't understand how we got ourselves in this position in which we worry about this issue. Cash up front, no government subsidy. We're taking money out of the Cuban government and putting it into the pockets of farmers and American business, agribusiness. Finally, my time has expired a minute and 18 seconds ago. I just would add, my provincial interest in this issue started with Kansas farmers with the desire to see that we have one more market. You may recall the year 2000 was not a perfect year on farms across this country, and every market mattered to us for our success. And again, Cuba's not the end all. It doesn't solve all of our problems. It doesn't make us all wealthy. But having spent some time on this issue, I am convinced, as has been indicated today, that this is not just about the United States. This is about how we change the Cuban people's opportunities, because economic freedom, the market system that we all say we believe in, the free market system, causes the Cuban people, when they have the ability to buy consumer goods, and in this case I'm just talking about food, when they fill their diet, the more contact we have with them economically, the more demands they will make upon the Cuban government to change for the opportunity of liberty and freedom. That ultimately is what this is about. Again, while I started out as just a provincial Kansas congressman wanting to take care of Kansas wheat farmers, I think there's a much more noble cause to this than just that, which is we can make a greater difference in the lives of Cubans by dealing with them than by ignoring them.